One of the main products that is linked with cow protection, which is beef, is actually not the main issue in India. It is actually dairying. There is no way for any type of animal sanctuary or gaushala to absorb the sheer scale of animals that the dairy industry expels every year. Is it possible to look at a cow or a pig or a chicken or a duck or whatever and not see a commodity there? Does it have to be the case that an anti-caste politics and an animal rights politics have to be irreconcilable?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. As you know, the cow is central to Indian politics. And in the past decade, as the BJP has run government at the center, the cow has loomed over public discourse on religion, caste, and nationalism. In states where the BJP is in government, we've seen a combination of tough laws, economic incentives, and cow vigilantism or gauraksha come into place to protect cows. In Maharashtra, just last month, the government announced a 50 rupee per day per cow subsidy to gaushalas, and it also said that all indigenous cows would henceforth be referred to as Rajya Mata, Gau Mata. The question is, has all of this added up to a better life, a better deal, and indeed protection for the animal at the center of all the politics, the cow? My guest today is probably going to say an emphatic and unequivocal no in answer to that question. Yamini Narayanan teaches at the Deakin University in Melbourne, and she's written this book, which I recommended earlier. I hope you've seen that recommendation, Mother Cow, Mother India, which provides an uncommon and alternative perspective on bovine politics. Yamini, thank you for making time today.
Thank you, Anuradha, so much for having me, and thank you for such a succinct introduction to the issue and to the book. I really appreciate it.
So you've done something very interesting. You have flipped the lens through which we look at this entire subject, isn't it? You've taken the human lens out and you've put the cow or the animal lens through, and you've looked at this. Tell us what you see when you look at the subject through this lens.
It was what my book was trying to do was look at the actor that's been sort of completely abstracted and invisibilized in this entire cow protection landscape, which are the cows themselves. The cows, the buffaloes, the bulls, the calves, who've been completely abstracted, rendered voiceless, rendered some sort of passive subjects upon whom we act out our politics, but they themselves are not seen to have any politics or agency or desires or life ambitions, or most importantly, any type of suffering, because suffering is one of the reasons. In fact, suffering is something which we don't politicize enough, but human suffering is quite at the center of why we debate identity politics in the first place, invisibilization, marginalization, but we haven't really engaged with the fact of non-human animal suffering as well in this landscape. And my entry into the cow protection landscape was actually inspired by a few animal activists that I accidentally met at the very outset of my journey. And they were actually talking about a whole spectrum of other issues that the cow is subject to as a result of being a dairy commodity. And it took me a while even then to realize that one of the main products that is linked with cow protection, which is beef, is actually not the main issue in India. It is actually dairying, because dairying is the reason why cows are bred in India in the first place. And I was also unprepared to understand or comprehend or realize the scale of suffering that is actually involved at virtually every stage of dairy production, not just in India, but just globally.
You use this phrase, the seamless continuum of India's milk and beef economy. So explain to people who've not read your book and who don't see it in this way, what that continuum is in economic terms.
So in India, which is a leading dairy producer and has been since 1997 or 1998, I believe, so India has been continuously the leading dairy producer for several decades now. The cows who are bred in India are all cows that are actually bred and reared for the dairy industry, whether it is the native breed cows, which are like Gir or Sahiwal, or the sort of exotic imported cows, so to speak, like the Holstein,
Yeah.
Jersey. All of these are hyperlactative. These cows have been bred to be hyperlactative. So just to take a step back here, cows in their very natural ethological wild state, and we actually don't really have a sense of those kind of cows anymore because cows have been bred so much. All domesticated animals are actually bred to hyperproduce whatever it is that is intended to be sourced from them, right? So in the case of cows bred for dairying, it is hyperlactation. So cows really only lactate about 4 or 5 liters of milk per day in their sort of wild state. And as I said, we don't have those kind of cows really anymore. But nowadays, you have cows that can lactate 40, 50, 60 liters of milk. And that's a huge strain, huge burden on any type of reproductive body. And in India, though, we only breed cows that are hyperlactating. If you look at countries like Australia, Argentina, United States, leading beef countries, Brazil, they actually have cows that are actually bred explicitly for beef. And these kind of breeds we don't even have in India. Like, for example, the Angus cows, the Wagyu cows, these are all cows that are bred specifically for beef.
And
so which basically
for the meat that they give you. For steak,
exactly.
The meat that they give you. The kind of meat that they give you.
Absolutely. So which basically means that they have different physiological properties. So they have double muscling, for example. So these are cows that have been bred to have a second layer of muscle, right? In order for their flesh to be consumable, right? Whereas dairy cows basically are emaciated by the end of their sort of lactative cycle, by the end of like 6-7 years of being used for dairy, reproduction year after year. They can be compared to the chickens that are used for eggs versus chickens that are used for meat. The broiler chickens, the white chickens that are actually used they're actually bred for the meat industry, right? Versus chickens that are used for the egg industry. I mean, there's a world of difference between the two. In India, our beef comes from dairy animals, whether they are buffalo or whether they are cows. Leading beef producers, of which India is one, but India is an exception here because all of these other countries actually have cows that are reared for beef. But the interesting thing about Indian beef production is that despite the fact that it is supposed to be of lower quality, despite the fact that its per unit value is half of that of other beef producers, so Indian beef is much cheaper than Australian, Brazilian, Argentinian, etc. beef, our competitive advantage in beef production comes from the fact that we slaughter an exponentially high number of.
So the volume is giving you the final revenue and not the value.
Exactly, not the quality. So it's the sheer volume of it. So we slaughter something like about 3 to 4 times as much as the leading beef producers. So we slaughter.
How did India become a leading beef exporter, given that it does not rear cattle, rear cows or buffaloes for beef consumption for the most part? And that the quality, therefore, of the beef that comes out of India, whether it's again cow, which is illegal, or buffalo meat, which is cara beef, how does this get exported? How did India become one of the largest exporters of beef?
That's such a great question. So there is a number of different reasons, and one is, if you look at the markets that India produces, they are generally markets where Indian beef is preferred just because of the lower prices. So Southeast Asia is a big market. Right. Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia is a big market. The Middle East is also a big market because they want halal beef, beef animals that have been slaughtered using the halal method. And all of our export-oriented slaughterhouses do adhere to halal regulations. So I've been to a few of them, and they all sort of adhere to that, and so they have to sort of adhere to export standards as well as export standards for public health and sanitation, but also in terms of regulations for halal slaughter. United States, interestingly, is also a major importer of Indian beef. And the reason that the United States imports it is because they have a huge hamburger market. Now, the hamburger market typically does actively use low quality beef. Any region which has a large hamburger market does import cheap beef, and India is an easy market. And the interesting thing is that while beef products are forbidden and prohibited in India, And like, the major fast food chains can't really sell beef products in India. Like they can't sell beef hamburgers in India, but then Indian bovines are being turned into hamburgers elsewhere in the world, right? They may not necessarily be cows. In fact, I would be fairly confident that the exported beef actually is almost overwhelmingly buffalo beef, because the export standards, there is so much at stake and there's so much at risk to it's simply not worth the risk of using cow beef. And most export oriented slaughterhouses that I visited, they are actually having to be quite careful for the simple reason that the risks are not worth it, and they face potentially the slaughterhouse being shut down, etc.
The beef exports out of India are buffalo meat.
They are, but at the same time, there would be some amount of cow beef going through, because even the state actually has beef testing facilities at almost all of its port cities, which the beef goes through. So there is a significant suspicion that there is some amount of cow beef going through. Though I think on the whole there is a lot of risk with licensed slaughterhouses undertaking this kind of risk.
Help us understand how all these measures to protect the cow, are actually, they don't end up protecting the cow. When you look at the dairy industry, and how it functions, and also, dairy is seen as virtuous and vital, both culturally, historically, politically. I just said, Maharashtra is now going to call its cow Rajya Mata, Gau Mata, so the mother of the state and the mother of, the mother. So what are the implications of the dairy industry and the way it functions in India and cow protection?
What's interesting about the cow, the cow in India and the nexus between nationalism and dairy capitalism, there's a really strong and intricate nexus. The body of the cow basically represents the body politic of an aspirational Hindu state, right? So the mother cow, the symbolism of the mother cow, but also the material body, so to speak, of the mother cow, also represents in some ways the body politic, the body of the country, the nation, right? And it's a stand-in for that. And this, of course, has a lot of emotive power, and but what becomes, this is also strategic in so many ways. So on the one hand, it blurs the fact that if the cow is a mother and the cow is our mother, technically speaking, the first right, our primordial right to our mother is that of her lactate, right? So we have an instantaneous right to her milk. So it kind of like obfuscates the fact that there is possibly problematic issues with milk itself. Milk is very strongly linked to the Hindu identity. And beef has been made to be very strongly linked with the Muslim identity, the Muslim and Dalit identity, right? It's not actually, any number of Muslims and Dalits I spoke to, they said beef actually in and of itself doesn't mean anything to us. It's just become important. It's been made important because it's been politicized and fetishized so much that beef has become a political product. But it's not naturally something which is significant for Muslims or for Dalits, but milk is actually significant for Hindus, right? I mean, virtually every Hindu ritual involves, the use of dairy products. No Hindu ritual is complete, in fact, without the use of, butter and ghee and something. Yeah. What this all obfuscates is the fact that, and I think this is not just a Hindu political obfuscation. I think more generally, it is not understood that products that are sourced from living animals, such as milk or such as eggs or such as fur, for example, they actually are also very strongly linked with the dairy, with the slaughter industry, right? In case of beef, the product is consumed. In order to access the product, you do have to slaughter the animal. In the case of milk, you slaughter after the extraction, right? So the dairy economics in just about every other dairy country, Australia has a leading dairy, in every leading dairy industry, it is understood that the dairy production continuum goes like this. You breed the animal, once the animal is, fertile, goes through a number of years of impregnation and, continuous lactation, etc. At some point, that drops off. The cow becomes steadily infertile. The cow also produces a lot less milk per pregnancy. There are lots of animals who are obviously born male, but lots of animals, a lot of sort of female animals who are born infertile, who are born lame, who are born diseased. I mean, not every female is capable of getting pregnant. So there's a whole number of infertile, unproductive animals. And what are you going to do with them? If you're looking at it from the perspective of cold economics, because they're going to be consuming resources that should be going to productive animals, right? So in every other country, it is understood that at the end of their lactation cycle, they will go to the slaughterhouse, right? In fact, Verghese Kurien, the father of India's White Revolution program, he lobbied really hard against a cow slaughter ban in India, precisely for this reason. So his memoir makes it really clear that India's dairy industry will not be viable without cow slaughter. We must have cow slaughter in order to have a viable dairy industry. Now, somehow in India, the perception or the logic is that where every other country, the cow goes through various stages of production to slaughterhouses, somehow in India, uniquely, it is able to bypass, the cow is able to bypass and just step out of this production line at that point. So they don't go to slaughterhouses. Instead, they go to gaushalas, or, we often see them abandoned on the streets. But they are basically able, it is possible, therefore, to skip, for them to avoid going to slaughterhouses. And as we were talking about earlier, like, it's not, no gaushala, no animal shelter, no animal sanctuary, whether they are religious or not. There is no way for any type of animal sanctuary or gaushala to absorb the sheer scale of animals that the dairy industry expels every year. There is absolutely no feasible way. In fact, the Animal Welfare Board of India overwhelmingly diverts funds to gaushalas, despite the fact that there are hundreds of species and animal shelters who also need help. But 80% of these funds are already diverted to gaushalas, and that's never going to be enough. There are gaushalas that have, the Patmeda gaushala in Rajasthan apparently has about 10,000 cows, and I did go and visit, and certainly they had a lot of cows. But there is always going to be a limit. There's just never going to be any capacity to absorb them. But also, if you go to see their lives in gaushalas, it's just 24/7 incarcerated, 24/7 tied. And we actually don't really pay attention to the violence of being tied all the time, especially for an animal that's gone through pregnancies and even when pregnant animals are constantly tied. And, any woman will tell you who's been in pregnancy about how, back pain, this, that, and this, they're just continuously tied.
So it's interesting, Yamini, your work and the arguments you put forward are, you're anti, and let me put it like that, you're anti both the dairy industry, the beef industry. So you're anti the use of animals by humans as if the humans are superior and they will decide everything, right? Which is the way the world is organized at this point of time. So what is the solution? Veganism, you're a vegan, and veganism is, as a philosophy, something that you feel needs to have policy support. Currently, it's individual choices that people are making,
yes.
Right?
Yes. So I should add that I wasn't obviously vegan when I started the research. I was a vegetarian, but the vegetarianism was just born out of cultural reasons. It was just the family that I was born into. I never thought about it. There was no animal ethics attached to any of any vegetarianism that I practiced, and it was the thing is, when you really confront what the animals go through, and when you see a mother getting hysterical and agitated in order to protect her calf, when you these things are almost undeniable, because somewhere I think humans are not cows and cows are not humans, but I think humans have the imagination to empathize with what they are seeing, right? And it is that pain, that suffering, as I was initially saying, because that suffering is something that we need to sort of really politicize at the center of everything, because the reason why we get so rightly worked up about a number of human rights issues, including the violations that occur routinely in cow protection issues, is ultimately the fundamental fact of suffering. Because there is so much profound suffering, whether it is human or animal. And we don't really actually discuss or politicize human suffering in those terms, but we certainly don't do that really for animals at all. Right. So when that, once it became really undeniable, I did very quickly go vegan. But also when I was starting to, when I read Verghese Kurien's memoir, and a lot of animal rights people don't like his memoir because they think, he sold out the cows. But I actually personally found it incredibly inspiring, because what Verghese Kurien advocates in his book is that he was really, he of course didn't have the cows in mind. He didn't even think about them, but he had the farmers' welfare. So he was really, he was actually very motivated by the upliftment of farmers, empowering farmers. And he had that, and of course, the way he did it, his methodology was through the dairy industry. And he talks about the fact that India was not a dairy country in the 1950s. And he was an incredibly astute management person who just advocated for subsidies, and he launched a program where none existed. And he did that by putting farmer first. And I thought this has incredible lessons and value for a plant-based agricultural industry where we also put the farmer first, because nothing is going to work if we don't put the farmer first. Farmers are not breeding cows and getting into dairying because they like that personally. It's because it's one of the most well-subsidized industries, right? And we could actually do that for a whole spectrum of other plant-based agricultural industries. Now, in saying that, it's also important to acknowledge that our food system generally is broken. Our vegan, plant-based agricultural food systems are also broken. We've had food activists and agrarian activists like Vandana Shiva talking about the ways that, our entire, the green revolution was profound with problems, through the genetic modification of seeds. There's a whole spectrum of ways in which our plant-based agricultural system is broken. But what I think we need to do is to really look at that, revitalize our indigenous food-based systems. And there is opportunity here, I think, to actually, provide a boost to farmers who, for example, the cashew industry. The cashew industry is one of the main sources of vegan dairying products, right? And it's profuse with human rights abuses. It's profuse with child rights abuses. And there's a real opportunity here to just go in there and clean it up and clean up this industry. The jackfruit industry in Kerala, for example, had, there was absolutely metric tons of jackfruit going to waste every year. And ever since it became a substitute pork product in the West, now there's, jackfruit being exported. But I'm not just talking in terms of meat or dairy substitutions alone. Like, this is an opportunity really for us to sort of revitalize our indigenous vegetarian food systems.
So I'm Bengali, and kathal, or the jackfruit in its vegetable form, is very popular as something that Bengalis consume as a vegetable, right? And now you have kathal biryani, so biryani with the kathal vegetable as its main component, as opposed to lamb or chicken or what have you. But the interesting thing is, in what you said, is that we need someone of Dr. Kurien's pragmatism, vision, and complete dedication, but to apply that kind of mind to a vegan, a vegan system, right? Which would provide.
Kurien actually did that with plant-based. He did that with plant-based products as well. So the Dhara sunflower oil is thanks to precisely to Kurien's vision and around collectivizing sunflower seed farmers and mobilizing subsidies for them in exactly the same way that he did for the dairy industry. So there's already an example just with him embedded in what Kurien already did, because what he did is applicable. It's possible to open it up and make it applicable more broadly. And but I think Kurien's vision does have the seed for the future. And I think the thing that we need to take away from Kurien is that he was really dedicated to empowerment of farmers. And in an era of escalating climate change, in an era of, growing sort of incapacity over land, we need to sort of rethink the way we do a plant-based agriculture anyway. But ultimately, at the heart of all of this is about radicalizing and remaking human-animal relationships here. Because veganism, it is, there's a fantastic British scholar called Eva Gerard, and she talks about this beautifully in her book on veganism, where she says, veganism is often reduced to a diet. It's a plant-based diet, or it's about, a
meat substitute and the soy milk and the almond milk.
Exactly. So it's often just reduced. But if you look deeper into the heart of why we sort of make these type of transformations, it is really about radicalizing and changing human-animal relationships. Is it possible to look at a cow or a pig or a chicken or a duck or whatever and not see a commodity there? Is it possible to see another being? And this is also the challenge within human identity politics as well. Is it possible to see the other and
as
not objectify them?
Yeah, as you would see yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yamini, there is a big argument about a cheap source of protein, the egg in the midday meal scheme in public schools here. What is the vegan options that will make up for the protein in people's diet, especially where malnutrition, hunger,
Absolutely.
Are huge everyday problems?
Absolutely. And this is such an important, it's such an important consideration. And here as well, I think we need to remember that the reason, chicken is cheaper than dal in India at the moment. And that's because the chicken industry is heavily subsidized. These are not natural. There's nothing natural about animal-based products becoming cheaper. It's because the industry is putting in so much subsidies into it, right? The state is putting in so much subsidies into it. So the state is driving it because there is a huge nexus always between some type of state stakes in it and capitalism, and the state is just lobbying. But we live in a democracy, or so we like to think, and we should be able to lobby for a reversal of all of these things. And it really is up to all of us from the the classes and castes who have had access to, you have the privilege of education, advocacy. I think we do have to take these responsibilities really seriously in terms of advocating for a reversal of these types of subsidies, and making, and if you look at dal, like every single dal has a specific type of protein, and India really, in the market, if you go, you probably get like 5, 6, 10 types of dals, but we should be having like 50, 60, 70, 100 different types of dals across the breadth of the country. We actually have a wider range. Almost everything comes up in a wider range when you think about plant-based protein, and it's just that it's how consumption works, is that when there is a narrative of ease, there is a narrative of accessibility, which has attached itself to meat, but it's not necessarily the case that these are real or these are true, because these are accessibilities of ease and convenience. This is how products are sold.
Yeah.
Right. So this is, one of the first things that Kurien says he did in promoting a dairy
marketing milk, isn't it? The marketing of milk.
Yeah, Kurien talks about this in his memoir, and he says one of the first things he did to promote milk in India was to hire brilliant advertising expensive specialists.
Yeah.
So he said he was just a brilliant management visionary, and he just sort of went at it from every angle. First of all, to convince the public, and then he had to convince the state. And he did both.
Yeah. It's quite, So, Yamini, the arguments that you make in your book, the arguments that you've elaborated on here today for us, they're not popular by any stretch of the imagination, right? In fact, in your book, you describe how on your fieldwork, you had to keep your emotions at bay. You had to ensure that you didn't reveal where you are, where you stand, what your position is on animal rights, that you were against a lot of the things that you were documenting and seeing and experiencing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Take us through a little bit of that, because also animal rights is really not front and center in India. We've had one iconic politician, and that's Maneka Gandhi, but it's really not something that's taken off in this country, right?
That's right. That's right. And in saying that, there is definitely much more of a growing movement in India as compared to a lot of other places in the developing world. But when I was out in the field, there was two sets of people that I was predominantly interacting with. One was the animal activists, and one was the people from the industry, right? And when it came to people from the industry, and there was a whole spectrum again of people that were, either working in very white collar end of the spectrum. So there might be, for example, if you go to a bovine semen farm, it's a highly specialized production site where a semen is extracted from the bulls and then it's stored in all these very advanced technological methods, right? So these are expensive sites. You need advanced degrees to be working in these places. So so there's that, and then you have these undercover cow slaughterhouses, which have a completely different demography because these are extremely vulnerable, impoverished people. They're not just undertaking a risky job. Slaughterhouses anywhere in the world, even in the United States, in Australia, Europe, anywhere, generally have vulnerable segments of the population. They are undocumented workers. They are oftentimes illegal immigrants, or they are very, very poor. And so too in India, amongst no one wants to go work in a slaughterhouse. So
and in India, you have the added caste and religious context, right?
Exactly. And in India, it is not just risky because slaughterhouse labor is difficult. It could quite literally get you killed. So because of the laws and because of the vigilantism and because of the sort of free pass that vigilantes seem to have these days. So this is incredibly risky labor that you would be prepared to do, and that would mean that you're fairly desperate if you are prepared to do that. So there was a whole spectrum of people, and the thing is, when you go and see a lot of the animal suffering, and when I would tell people about it, and they would often say, "Oh, I don't want to know, I don't want to know," I don't want to know. And a lot of people have told me, "I want to read your book because I don't want to know." But I actually don't think that it is because I thought about this a lot, and I don't think it is because people don't care about animals. I think people are actually genuinely terrified that they might care too much because it is so difficult. It is so unjustifiable. It is so undeniable. It is so confronting. And I think the fact that animals suffer in very specific, extraordinary, profound ways to what we do, and that suffering is relatable. It kind of comes back, I think, to some of our own primordial fears. Our own primordial fears of losing our children or losing our mother, or these are very primordial, confronting fears that I think every human being might be able to relate with, whether or not they have children. I mean, they've all been mothered in some ways, right? So it kind of, the resistance, the anguish, and in so many ways, and I hesitate to use this word innocence because it kind of diminishes, I think, animal intelligence. So I don't intend to do that when I use the word innocence. It's not to diminish their intelligence, their cognition, because I think that is what we respond to, because we are so stunned and shocked by how much they do know, how much they do understand, and how their suffering is actually intensified as a result of how much they do comprehend. And it is not to sort of always put things in a hierarchy that's saying, oh, you care about animals more than humans, or you care, in America, there's this constant narrative about white people care about animals more than black people, or, upper caste Indians care about animals more than Dalits or Muslims. And I really wanted to challenge this idea in my book as well, that I don't think it has to be a bifurcation in terms of who we care about. I think it is not beyond us to be responsible to do different groups of people and to reconcile that. I really had to personally think about this a lot, especially coming from a privileged caste.
In fact,
and, the sort of typification.
I wanted to bring this up because you talk about it right up front, right? You're born into a Brahmin family, you're vegetarian by habit, by tradition, because that's what you grew up as. So this research, this journey that you embark on through this book and your work is fraught with certain dilemmas for you personally as well, isn't it? Because you could get co-opted into the cow protection politics and that community of right-wing, of the Hindu right. You could be seen by the Dalit community who've made beef eating a part of identity politics in India today, as somebody who's prioritizing animal over human, right? There are so many. It's fraught for you. This book is fraught at many levels.
Yeah, and I had to really take all of these complexities and seeming contradictions very seriously, because, as I said at the outset, a number of Dalit and Muslim interlocutors that I spoke with, they said, beef has been made political. We actually have to respond to the fact that beef is being weaponized against us. One of the ways to respond is to weaponize the beef back. Right? I mean, it's basically weaponization that's happening at both ends. And it is completely understandable as to why Dalit politics will unfold through the celebration of beef festivals, for example. That makes sense to me, right? That makes sense to me. But what I wanted to sort of look into here more deeply as well is, does it have to be the case that an anti-caste politics and an animal rights politics have to be irreconcilable? Does it have to be the case? Does it have to be the case? Can we not be profoundly and thoroughly committed to an anti-caste politics and also have an animal rights ethics at the same time? And this, I think, brings the accountability back to what I've tried to do in the book, which is very much in response to the cold economic realities of dairy production in India, is to actually shift the focus completely away from beef and to focus on dairy, a product that is actually very intimately interlinked with the Brahmin caste. It is intimately interlinked with the upper class and upper castes, but also just more broadly as well.
And with cow protect, and is at the the fulcrum of all cow protection in India, isn't it?
Exactly. So in some ways, beef has been hyper-politicized. Dairy has also been hyper-politicized, but in a much more benign and almost in an obfuscating way, right? Because beef, the dairy has been Hinduized, dairy has been sentimentalized, dairy is spoken of in very emotive terms, and thereby, in some ways, dairy is almost invisible as compared to beef in terms of its visibility. Like, beef is hyper visible, and it's really interesting and also illogical that beef is hyper visible because beef is only a byproduct of dairy in India. Yeah. Beef, leather, bone char they're all byproducts. These are not primary products. The primary product is dairy. So I've tried to sort of relocate the focus into on dairying. But I think ultimately what an anti-caste, but also what I call an anti-anthropocentric politics.
Yeah.
What they would go together is, and it's always been a challenge. This is not newly a challenge in India. Will Kimlicka, a political scientist in Canada, he talks about this in the context of Canada, that when it comes to a majorities type of dialogue or debate or discussion around animal rights, there are certain patterns that tend to ensue. Oftentimes the majority or the more dominant segment of the population will attack the minority population, saying, "Oh, they're doing something terrible to animals." So in Canada, for example, Muslims were constantly attacked for using halal slaughter methods, as though and if you really look at it from a strictly what happens to the animal perspective, there's really not much of a difference at all between stunned and halal slaughter. When the numbers are that high, both types of slaughter almost look indistinguishable from each other. And he was talking about how the right wing in Canada started to target Muslims and animal rights only when they ran out of other things. They went after them for the mosque, they went after them for women's rights, and then they found animal rights. Like, they weren't concerned with animal rights. Same as the right wing in India as well. No one's concerned with animal rights. It just becomes a way of beating up, or quite literally, a vulnerable segment of the population. And in turn, the minorities will often say, "Oh, well, you fix your practices first and then come after us."
Yeah.
And he says, well, we kind of reach an impasse with that.
Yeah.
So, and the challenge is really for us to all come together.
Yamini, I think to break that impasse is what your book does. Here it is for people who haven't picked it up yet. It is something you should read because, as you've heard, and we've listened to Yamini so carefully in this conversation, it's reframing the debate. It's re-looking at something that we've used very traditional and it's about us. Her book makes this entire conversation about the cow, about the buffalo, the animal at the center of the politics. Thank you very much. We'll keep talking.
Thank you so much, Anuradha. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for having me.